Hi family, today's Black Energy Never Dies history is a shocking one. And I like to talk about the Cape Coast Slave Castle, the church that the British built on top of the male slave dungeon at the Cape Coast Slave Castle. Now, the male slave dungeon was designed by the British slaveholders to hold about 1,000 African men. And the African men in that male slave dungeon were being held from 2 weeks to 3 months before they were shipped off across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. The British slaveholders also built a church on top of the male slave dungeon. Shocking. The church is known as Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Society for the Propagation of the Gospel is an Anglican church of England. And they had a church on top of the dungeon. In that same dungeon, there was a massive influx of mosquitoes, a wide spread of diseases, malaria especially, killed many of our ancestors. They had rashes all over their bodies. And the British Christians had a church on top of these people who couldn't eat. They could not eat, sleep. They defecated. They slept on the floor. And they had a church on top of them. Now, when you visit the place carefully and you get closer to the church, you see a window in that church. A window. I call it a spy hole. And that spy hole is connected to the male dungeon from the church. So basically, the British Christians, the British slaveholders could worship, preach in that church, and they could still see everything that was going on in the male slave dungeon. This is the part that we do not get to understand. It's shocking. I personally think that the British slaveholders built the church on top of the male slave dungeon in order to exhibit some kind of supremacy. We're on top of you. You can't do anything. You are beneath us. We are superior to you. We can feed you with what we want to feed you with. I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about the experiences our ancestors had to go through from being innocent to being enslaved people, both physically and mentally, before they were shipped off to the Americas. I call that experience they had to go through pain compliance, using pain to get results from people. Let me know what you think about the reasons why the British slaveholders built the church on top of the male slave dungeon at the Cape Coast Slave Castle.